The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty trading post, but Sarah Mitchell felt nothing but cold. Her wrists, raw from rope burns, hung limp at her sides as she stood between two outlaws who spoke about her as if she were livestock. The New Mexico territory stretched endlessly around them, a harsh, unforgiving landscape that mirrored the emptiness she felt inside. "She's worth at least $50, growled Jake Morrison, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. His weathered face bore the scars of a life lived outside the law. Maybe more to the right buyer. His partner, a thin man called Snake, laughed coldly. 50? Look at her, Jake. She's barely holding together. We're lucky if we get 20. Sarah's blue dress, once her Sunday best, hung in tatters. Dirt and exhaustion had painted dark circles under her green eyes. 3 weeks ago, she had been a schoolteacher in the small town of Esperanza. 3 weeks ago, she had a life, a future, hope. Now, she was a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. The trading post door creaked open, and several men emerged into the blazing afternoon heat. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the type. Rough men with cruel eyes and calloused hands who saw women as objects to be owned. But then, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering, she noticed someone different. He was Apache. She could tell from his buckskin clothing and the way he wore his long black hair. Unlike the others, he didn't push forward or shout offers. Instead, he watched her with dark eyes that seemed to see past the dirt and despair to something the others had missed. When their eyes met briefly, she saw something she hadn't seen in weeks. Recognition of her humanity. "What do you think you're looking at, Apache?" Snake snarled, noticing the quiet observer. "You got money to spend, or are you just here to waste our time?" The Apache man stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with strong features and a bearing that spoke of dignity despite the hostility surrounding him. When he spoke, his English was clear and measured. "I have what you want," he said simply. Jake Morrison laughed harshly. "Oh, you do? And what might that be? A handful of pretty rocks and some rabbit fur?" Without a word, the Apache man walked to where his horse stood tethered. The animal was a magnificent bay stallion, its coat gleaming in the desert sun. Sarah had grown up around horses and could see immediately that this was a valuable animal, the kind that could carry a man safely across hundreds of miles of dangerous territory. "The horse," the Apache said, returning to stand before the outlaws. "And this." He held up a rifle, a newer model Winchester that would cost more than most men, made in a year. The gathered buyers fell silent. Even Jake Morrison's greedy eyes widened at the sight of such valuable trade goods. "You're offering both?" Snake asked, his voice suddenly less confident. "The horse and the rifle? For her?" The Apache man nodded once. "And these?" He reached into a leather pouch and pulled out several pieces of jewelry, silver bracelets, and a turquoise necklace that caught the light like captured sky. Sarah realized with a start that these weren't just valuable. They were likely family heirlooms, pieces that held deep personal meaning. "Everything," the Apache said, his gaze steady on Sarah. "Everything I have." The other buyers began to protest, but Jake Morrison was already calculating. The horse alone was worth more than any of their cash offers, and the rifle would bring top dollar in any frontier town. The jewelry was just added value. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake muttered, then louder, "You got yourself a deal, Apache." As the transaction took place, Sarah felt the world spinning around her. This stranger, this man she had never seen before, was giving up everything he owned for her freedom. But why? What could possibly motivate such sacrifice? The Apache man approached her as Jake Morrison led away the bay stallion. His movements were gentle, unthreatening. From his remaining belongings, he pulled out a worn but clean blanket, clearly his own, and carefully draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was so unexpected, so kind, that Sarah felt tears she thought had dried up weeks ago beginning to fall. "My name is Ayana," he said quietly, speaking only to her. "It means eternal blossom." In my language, I am taking you home. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, to thank him, to ask why, but he gently shook his head. Rest first, Ayana said. Questions later. You are safe now. As they walked away from the trading post, him leading a simple pack mule that carried his few remaining possessions, her wrapped in his blanket, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Not happiness, not yet, but the faintest possibility of it. Behind them, the Outlaws counted their unusual payment and laughed about the foolish Apache who had traded away everything for a broken white woman. But Ayana didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on the path ahead. And for the first time since her nightmare began, Sarah felt that someone saw her not as property, but as a person worth saving. The desert stretched before them, vast and challenging, but no longer empty. In the growing trust between two strangers lay the beginning of something neither had expected to find in such a harsh and unforgiving land. The adobe house sat nestled against red rock cliffs like it had grown from the earth itself. Ayana's home was simple but clean, with thick walls that kept out the desert heat and small windows that framed the endless sky. As they approached after their day-long journey, Sarah saw gardens where corn, beans and squash grew in neat rows, a testament to patience and care in an unforgiving land. This is where you will heal, Ayana said, helping her down from the mule. Her legs, weakened by weeks of poor treatment, barely held her weight. Inside, the house was cool and peaceful. Woven baskets lined the walls, and simple furniture spoke of a life lived with intention rather than excess. Ayana guided her to a corner where thick blankets created a comfortable sleeping area. I will prepare food, he said. You should rest. Sarah wanted to protest. She had been taught that guests should help, that accepting charity was shameful, but exhaustion overwhelmed her manners. She sank onto the blankets and watched as Ayana moved quietly around his home, building up the fire and preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and herbs she didn't recognize. When he brought her the wooden bowl, their fingers touched briefly as she accepted it. She noticed his hands, strong from work, but gentle, with small scars that spoke of a life lived outdoors. These were hands that built things, that cared for growing plants, that created rather than destroyed. Why? Sarah asked suddenly, the question that had been burning inside her since the trading post. Why did you give up everything for me? You don't even know me. Ayana was quiet for a long moment, settling cross-legged near her sleeping area, but maintaining a respectful distance. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. 2 winters ago, my sister Nalnish was taken by slave traders, he said, staring into the fire. They sold her somewhere far from here. I searched for months, traded everything I had for information, followed every lead. I never found her. Sarah felt her heart clench at the quiet anguish in his voice. When I saw you today, Ayana continued, I saw her. Not your face, your spirit. The way you held yourself despite everything they had done. The way you still had fight in your eyes even when your body was ready to surrender. I could not save Nalnish, but I could save you. What if you never find her? Sarah asked gently. Then I will know I did what I could for someone else's sister, someone else's daughter. Sometimes that is all we can do. Save the person in front of us and trust that somewhere someone is doing the same for the ones we love. They ate in comfortable silence as the desert evening painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sarah found herself watching Ayana, studying this man who had shown her more kindness in one day than she had experienced in months. He moved with quiet confidence, every action deliberate and respectful. I was a school teacher, Sarah said suddenly, surprising herself. She hadn't spoken about her old life since her capture in Esperanza. I taught children to read and write. Ayana looked up with genuine interest. You must miss it, sharing knowledge, watching minds grow. I do, Sarah admitted, and felt tears threatening again. I thought I would die without ever teaching another child, without ever seeing another student's face light up when they finally understood a difficult lesson. "Why must you speak of this in the past?" Ayana asked. "You are alive. Your knowledge is still here." He tapped his temple. "Your heart for teaching is still here." He placed his hand over his heart. "These things were not stolen from you." Sarah stared at him. In all her despair, she had never considered that she might still have a future, that her old dreams might still be possible. But who would want a teacher who has been... She struggled with the words, shame coloring her cheeks. "Who has been with Outlaws?" "My reputation." "Your reputation is what you make it from this day forward," Ayana said firmly. "What was done to you does not define what you will become. A tree that survives the storm is not weaker. It is stronger, its roots deeper." Over the following days, Sarah began to heal in ways she hadn't expected. Ayana never pushed, never demanded explanations or gratitude. He simply provided food when she was hungry, space when she needed solitude, quiet conversation when silence became too heavy. He taught her about the plants in his garden, showing her which ones could heal wounds and which could ease pain. In return, she began to share stories of her classroom, of children who had struggled with letters until they suddenly formed words, of the joy she had felt when education opened new worlds for young minds. "There is a school in Tucson," Ayana mentioned one evening as they tended his garden together. "The teacher there is old and speaks of retirement. They would be fortunate to have someone with your heart for learning." Sarah's hands stilled among the bean plants. "They would never accept me, not after." "They will accept who you are now," Ayana said confidently. "And who you are now is someone who has survived what would break others, someone who still believes in the power of knowledge even after losing everything else. That is exactly the kind of teacher children need." As the weeks passed, Sarah felt strength returning to her body and her spirit. She helped with the gardens, learned to prepare traditional foods, and listened to Ayana's stories of his people's history and traditions. He, in turn, asked her to teach him better written English, saying that understanding both languages would help him trade more fairly with all kinds of people. Their evening lessons became the highlight of Sarah's day. Sitting by lamplight, watching Ayana carefully form letters on a piece of precious paper, seeing his face light up when he successfully wrote a complex word, these moments reminded her why she had become a teacher in the first place. "You learn quickly," she told him one evening, reviewing his writing practice. "I have a good teacher," he replied, and something in his voice made her look up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. It was gratitude, certainly, but something more. Something that made her heart race and her cheeks warm. Something that felt dangerous and wonderful and completely unexpected. "Sarah," Ayana said quietly, "you know you are free to leave whenever you wish. I do not own you. No one owns you." "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what if I don't want to leave? What if I want to stay and help you find your sister? What if I want to teach the children in your community? What if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the thought that had been growing in her heart, that perhaps she had found not just freedom, but home. Ayana reached across the small space between them and gently took her hand. His touch was warm and steady, like everything else about him. "Then you stay," he said simply. "For as long as you want, you stay." Outside, the desert night was alive with the sounds of crickets and distant coyotes. Inside the small adobe house, two people who had found each other in the midst of loss began to imagine a future neither had expected. A future built on respect, trust, and the slow, careful growth of something that might, in time, become love. But the past has a way of reaching into the present, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, trouble was already riding their way. The letter arrived with the supply wagon from Tucson, carried by a nervous trader who kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting trouble to follow him across the desert. Ayana accepted the worn envelope with growing unease. Few people knew where to find him, and fewer still would send written correspondence. Sarah was teaching a group of Apache children under the Ramada when she noticed his expression change as he read. 3 months had passed since her rescue, 3 months of healing and growing trust. She had been helping educate the children in both English and their traditional skills, and the community had welcomed her presence with careful but genuine warmth. "What is it?" she asked, when the children had returned to their families for the evening meal. Ayana's jaw was tight as he handed her the letter. "It seems your rescue was noticed by more than just outlaws." Sarah's blood turned cold as she read the crude handwriting. "Apache, we know you got the white woman. She belongs to us. We paid good money for her, and we want her back. Meet us at Devil's Canyon tomorrow at sunset. Bring the woman or we'll come take her and burn your village while we're at it. Don't try to run. We know these desert ways better than you think. Morrison and Company. They can't just..." Sarah began, but the words died in her throat. Of course they could. Law was sparse in the territory, and even when it existed, it rarely protected Apache communities or women who had been sold like cattle. "I will not give you back to them," Ayana said firmly. "This I promise you." But Sarah saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he glanced toward the village where children played and elders shared stories around evening fires. She understood the terrible weight he carried. His choice wasn't just about her anymore. It was about protecting everyone he cared for. "How many of them are there?" she asked quietly. The trader said he saw 5 men, maybe 6. They made camp 2 days' ride from here and sent him ahead with the message. They know these lands better than most outlaws. Someone is guiding them. Sarah's stomach churned. Morrison and his gang were dangerous enough, but if they had local knowledge, they could indeed make good on their threat to attack the village. That evening, as the community gathered for their evening meal, Sarah felt the weight of every glance, every smile from the children she had been teaching. These people had accepted her, shared their food and knowledge, treated her with kindness when the rest of the world had shown her only cruelty. Now, her presence brought danger to their doorstep. "There is another way," Sarah said quietly, as she and Ayana walked along the edge of the cultivated fields under a canopy of stars. "I could go with them willingly. End this without anyone else getting hurt." Ayana stopped so abruptly that she nearly stumbled. When he turned to face her, his eyes blazed with an intensity she had never seen before. "You would choose that hell again? Choose to return to men who see you as property?" "I would choose to protect people who have shown me nothing but kindness," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "These children, their families, they shouldn't suffer because of me." "And what of your dreams?" Ayana asked, stepping closer. "What of the school in Tucson? What of the future we have been building?" The word "we" hung in the desert air between them, heavy with implications neither had been brave enough to voice directly. Sarah felt her resolve wavering as she looked into his face, this good man who had sacrificed everything for her freedom. "Some dreams are not meant to be," she whispered. "No," Ayana said fiercely. "Some dreams are worth fighting for." He took her hands in his, and she could feel the calluses from weeks of preparing for this moment, sharpening weapons, setting snares, turning his peaceful home into a fortress. "I have a plan," he said, "but I need you to trust me completely." "Ayana, I won't let you risk..." "Listen to me," he interrupted gently but firmly. "Morrison thinks like an outlaw. He expects fear, expects running or hiding. He does not expect strategy. He does not expect allies." "What allies? Your people shouldn't have to fight because of me." Ayana smiled, and for the first time since the letter arrived, she saw hope in his expression. "Not just my people. Remember the trader who brought the message. He was nervous, yes, but not afraid of us. He was afraid of Morrison. These outlaws have been terrorizing trade routes for months. The merchant community wants them stopped as much as we do." Over the next 24 hours, Sarah watched in amazement as Ayana's plan unfolded. Messages went out through channels she hadn't known existed. Apache scouts who could move unseen across vast distances, traders who owed favors. Even a few retired cavalry soldiers who had settled in the territory and grown tired of lawless men preying on honest folks. "You're not just saving me," Sarah realized as riders began arriving discreetly throughout the day. "You're ending their threat permanently." "A problem shared is a problem halved," Ayana replied, checking his rifle one more time. Morrison chose the wrong woman to steal and the wrong man to threaten. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of Devil's Canyon. But she wasn't alone, and she wasn't helpless. Hidden among the rocks and brush, 24 men waited. Apache warriors, Hispanic traders, Anglo settlers, even a few Mexican vaqueros who had their own grievances with Morrison's gang. For the first time since her ordeal began, Sarah felt truly powerful. Not because she was rescued, but because she was choosing to stand and fight alongside people who valued justice over easy profit. When Morrison and his men rode into the canyon confident and arrogant, they found exactly what they expected: an Apache man and a white woman standing alone in the gathering dusk. What they didn't expect was the sound of rifles being cocked from every direction around them. "You boys seem to be lost," called out Sheriff Martinez from Tucson, emerging from behind a boulder with his badge glinting in the fading light. "This is territory you're not welcome in anymore." Morrison's face went white as he realized the scope of his miscalculation. He had underestimated the network of relationships that Ayana had built, the respect he commanded, not just among his own people, but throughout the diverse community of the territorial frontier. The confrontation was over before it truly began. Faced with overwhelming numbers and trapped in a canyon with no escape route, Morrison and his gang surrendered without firing a shot. As the sheriff and his deputies led them away in chains, Morrison looked back at Sarah with rage and disbelief. "This ain't over, woman," he snarled. "There's always another buyer, always another." "No," Sarah said firmly, stepping forward. "It is over. I am not for sale, and I never was. I am a free woman with a name, a mind, and a future, and you will never take that from anyone ever again." As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the desert night, Sarah felt Ayana's hand slip into hers. Around them, their allies were sharing water and conversation, bonding over a successful effort to rid their territory of a dangerous threat. "It is truly over," Ayana said quietly. Sarah nodded, but her eyes were already turning toward tomorrow. "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "It's just beginning." The desert stars wheeled overhead as two people who had found strength in each other prepared to build something lasting in a land that demanded both courage and hope. 6 months later, the one-room schoolhouse in Esperanza buzzed with activity. Sarah stood at the front of the classroom, watching as children of all backgrounds, Apache, Mexican, Anglo, worked together on their lessons. On the blackboard behind her, words were written in both English and Apache script, a small revolution in a territory where such cooperation was rare. "Miss Sarah," called out Maria Gonzalez, a 10-year-old whose father ran the general store, "can you show us again how to write friend in Apache?" "Of course," Sarah replied, moving to the board. But before she could write, young Thomas Swift, an Apache boy, stood up. "I can show her," he said proudly, taking the chalk and carefully forming the characters he had learned both at school and at home. "My uncle taught me this word in the old way, and Miss Sarah taught me how to write it down." Sarah felt her heart swell as she watched the children naturally bridging the cultural divides that had separated their parents for generations. This was what she had dreamed of, education that honored all traditions while preparing children for a changing world. Through the window, she could see Ayana working with a group of older students in the garden behind the school. He'd become an unofficial teacher of agricultural and survival skills, showing children how to read the land, how to grow food in harsh conditions, how to live in harmony with the desert environment. The Territorial Education Board had initially been skeptical of hiring an Apache man, but the results spoke for themselves. Their students were among the most well-rounded and practical in the territory. After the children left for the day, Sarah found Ayana sitting under the ramada he had built beside the schoolhouse, reviewing a letter that had arrived with the morning mail. "News?" she asked, settling beside him on the wooden bench they had crafted together. "From my cousin in the north," Ayana said, his voice carefully controlled. "There have been sightings, a young Apache woman matching Nalnish's description, working at a trading post near Santa Fe." Sarah felt her breath catch. In all their months together, they had continued to search for news of his sister, following every lead and hoping against hope. This was the most promising information they had received. "When do we leave?" she asked without hesitation. Ayana looked at her with surprise. "We? Did you think I would let you go alone? That I would sit here and wonder while you searched for your sister?" Sarah took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth and strength. "We're partners now, in everything. Besides, I speak better English than you do. If we need to negotiate or gather information in Anglo settlements, you'll need me. The school can manage for a few weeks. Mrs. Henderson has been wanting to try her hand at teaching again since her husband passed. This will give her a chance to feel useful and give the children exposure to different teaching styles." Ayana studied her face, seeing the determination there. Over the months, Sarah had grown from a rescued victim into a fierce, capable woman who had rebuilt her life on her own terms. She had faced down the Territorial Education Board when they questioned her qualifications, had stood up to parents who questioned her methods, had transformed a struggling rural school into a model for integrated education. "There is something else," Ayana said quietly. "Something I need to tell you before we begin this journey together." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. "What is it?" When I find Nalnish, if we find her, she may need time to heal, time to remember who she was before she was taken. She may need to stay with us for a while, to rediscover her place in the world." "Of course," Sarah said immediately. "This is her home too. And if she chooses to return to our traditional ways, to live with our people in the old manner," Sarah began to understand his concern. "You're asking if I would be willing to leave the school, to live as your sister needs to live?" Ayana nodded, his dark eyes searching her face. "I am asking if the life we have built together is strong enough to bend without breaking." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking of all the ways her life had changed since that day at the trading post. She had learned that home wasn't a place, but a feeling, that family wasn't just blood, but choice, that love wasn't possession, but partnership. "Ayana," she said finally, "when you traded everything you had for my freedom, what did you expect in return?" "Nothing," he answered immediately. "Your freedom was enough." "Exactly. You gave without expecting anything back. That's when I knew." She paused, gathering courage for words she had never spoken aloud. "That's when I knew I was falling in love with you. Not because you rescued me, but because you saw me as a person worth saving without asking for anything in return." Ayana's breath caught as she continued. "If your sister needs us to change our lives, then we change our lives. If she needs to heal in traditional ways, then I learn traditional ways. If she needs her brother to choose between his white woman and his family—" "Stop," Ayana said firmly, taking both her hands. "Nalnish would never ask me to choose, and you are not my white woman. You are Sarah Mitchell, teacher, partner, the woman who chose to build a life with me when you could have gone anywhere, done anything. You are the woman I want to marry, if you will have me." The proposal, coming at this moment of uncertainty and possibility, felt perfectly right. Sarah looked into the face of the man who had taught her that strength could be gentle, that love could be patient, that two people from different worlds could create something entirely new together. "Yes," she said simply, "in whatever way honors both our traditions, in whatever place allows us to keep helping others, yes." 3 weeks later, they stood outside a trading post in Santa Fe, watching as a young Apache woman with intelligent eyes and careful movements served customers with quiet efficiency. Even from a distance, The resemblance to Ayana was unmistakable. "Nalnish," he whispered, and Sarah heard 2 years of grief and hope in that single word. The reunion was everything Sarah had imagined and nothing she had expected. There were tears, yes, but also laughter as brother and sister shared stories and memories. Nalnish had survived by adapting, learning skills that helped her navigate both Apache and Anglo worlds. She was wary at first of Sarah, unsure why her brother had chosen to partner with a white woman, but as the days passed and they traveled together back toward home, understanding grew between them. "You teach children," Nalnish observed one evening as they camped under a canopy of desert stars. "I do," Sarah replied. "Your brother helps me. We try to prepare them for a world where they'll need to understand many different ways of living." "This is good work," Nalnish said thoughtfully. "Our grandmother always said that the strongest trees are those that can bend with the wind while keeping their roots deep." "Will you stay with us?" Ayana asked hopefully. "Help us with this work." Nalnish smiled, the first truly relaxed expression Sarah had seen from her. "For a while, yes. I want to learn about this school where Apache children write in their own language and Anglo children learn to read the land. This sounds like a place where healing can happen." As they continued their journey home, Sarah reflected on the strange paths that had brought them all together. She had been broken and sold like property, but in her rescue had found not just freedom, but purpose. Ayana had lost everything in trade for a stranger's life, but had gained a partner and family. Nalnish had been stolen from her people, but had developed skills and perspectives that would help bridge two worlds. "We're all different than we were," Sarah said to Ayana as they rode side by side across the familiar landscape of home. "Different, but not broken," he replied. "Stronger for the growing." "Like desert plants," Nalnish added from behind them. "We learn to thrive in hard places." The schoolhouse came into view as the sun reached its zenith, and Sarah could see children playing in the yard, Mrs. Henderson trying to manage their energetic games. Soon there would be another teacher, another perspective, another way of bridging the gaps between different worlds. As they approached the building that had become the center of their life together, Sarah felt the satisfaction of completed circles. She had been lost and found herself. She had been saved and learned to save others. She had found love in the last place she expected it and discovered that the strongest foundations were built not on similarity, but on respect for difference. "Home," Ayana said simply as they dismounted. "Home," Sarah agreed, watching as the children caught sight of them and came running with shouts of welcome. In the distance, the desert stretched endlessly under an azure sky, harsh and beautiful and full of possibility. Like love itself, like the life they had chosen to build together, it demanded courage but rewarded those brave enough to put down roots in difficult soil. The story that had begun with a transaction at a dusty trading post had become something far greater, a testament to the truth that freedom, once given freely, multiplies and grows, creating spaces where healing, learning, and love can flourish, even in the most unlikely places.